You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Well, this past week, Arkansas PBS held debates for all four of the Arkansas's congressional races. On Wednesday, we saw District 1 and District 3. In District 3, Republican Congressman Steve Womack battled it out against his opponents, Democrat Caitlin Draper and Libertarian Bobby Wilson. One topic that generated a lot of buzz: reproductive rights.
Her answer is, I don't know. You should probably make plans to get out of the state. Mr. Womack was asked by a journalist, to comment. He said, no comment, none of my business. And I thank you for that. That was the right thing to say. I just wish that you would legislate with that same sentiment.
My heart breaks for you on that matter. I will tell you, as I said in my opening, we have this issue settled at the Supreme Court level. It's at the states where it belongs, and the federal government should not be in the business right now of trying to prescribe what can and what can't happen. Leave it to the states.
This is a problem that just keeps on never solving, because that's what they do. They don't actually solve any of the problems. This has been something that I remember going over this when I was in high school. I remember dealing with this 10 years ago. And this is something to where both parties profit by not solving from this. So this is something where we want to make sure we look outside the parties.
And prior to that debate, District 1, Republican Congressman Rick Crawford squared off against Democrat Rodney Govins and Libertarian Steve Parsons. One of the topics that afternoon, especially important given the current situation in the Gulf of Mexico and in Florida, FEMA funding.
FEMA should reserve that money to protect American citizens, because that's what it's for. Protecting immigrants that have crossed the border illegally, I think, is a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars as it applies to taking away from FEMA to house illegals.
When there is a hurricane, when there is a tornado, when there is flooding going on in the community, I have never, ever seen or known a National Guardsman to ask, are you an American citizen, before I pull you out of this boat and provide you with food and water that you might need. FEMA definitely needs more money.
FEMA is highly political, so where the dollars go is political. But more importantly, it distorts decisions about where people live and what they do.
And
FEMA money disproportionately goes to areas
we
that
hope
have
to represent Arkansas's second district, which is here in the central part of the state. One big issue they discussed were Second Amendment rights. Democratic candidate Marcus Jones says he wants to look at closing loopholes on ghost guns and securing safe storage for guns. Congressman French Hill, the Republican, says he's already proven he supports common sense gun laws.
Well, I have voted for common sense gun reforms and advocated for that. And more importantly, I've supported federal funding to our schools and our school districts to support safer public safety for our kids as a father of two. And they were in high school when I started my run for Congress.
Congressman Hill will not ever vote for the common sense gun reforms I talked about. He will not represent Arkansas families in that way. He has already sold that vote.
And Thursday, 4th District Congressman Bruce Westerman took on Democratic candidate Reese Howard. One of the questions centered around whether this should be a national issue or a state-by-state issue. The Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade left it up to the states, which means here in Arkansas we have a near total abortion ban as a result of action taken by the state legislature, which is outside of Congress's control.
I have talked to women in the 4th District, and they unanimously agree that a woman should have a right to make that choice herself, and it should be a decision that's made between the woman and her doctor.
I don't believe the majority of women that I come across in the 4th District are pro-choice from the standpoint of the Democrat position on abortion, where they want it with no restrictions all the way up until birth. I think there's varying degrees between that and my position of I'm always going to protect life.
And you can watch all four of those congressional debates on myarpbs.org/elections. Now, when we come back, we're with Caitrin Assaf and George Jared to discuss those debates. Stay with us.
You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to the program. Here to talk about those congressional district debates is KARK's Caitrin Assaf and Talk Business and Politics' George Jared. Thank you both for being here today. You were both panelists on these debates. And so I'm going to start with we'll go in congressional district order here. George, you were on the first and the third debate panels. Let's start with the first. You represent us up in Northeast Arkansas anyway, Congressman Crawford's hometown. What did you think of the debate? I thought there was some pretty heated exchanges in there, particularly about, is Congressman Crawford in the district enough? So,
yeah, Rodney Govins, the Democrat in the race, he came up with a catchphrase, where's Rick, or has anybody seen Rick, or something like that, and so they kind of went after each other for a little bit. It was kind of a feisty debate. I've covered a lot of these through the years and been a panelist on them, and they went after each other. Parsons, the Libertarian in the race, he also went after Congressman Crawford on his sponsoring of, getting rid of, like abortion bans and stuff like that, sponsoring bills. Now, Rick did point out that he didn't vote on any of those bills, and he said he doesn't support that. But it got to the point where in the middle of the debate, he just started they started talking back and forth at each other during their time. So
you always love it when a moderator loses control of a debate, guys. That's always the best scenario you could possibly be in there. Caitrin, you were on the second district panel there. That one was interesting in that there was no third party candidate in that race. It was just the two of them, the Democrat and the Republican, French Hill and Marcus Jones. What was your takeaway from that debate?
Well, I think, it's interesting whenever you have someone going up against an incumbent, especially someone who's been in that position for, nearly 10 years. And so we saw a lot of, Marcus Jones kept saying, you're going to see contrast, and here's the difference between me and Congressman Hill. So he really tried to point out the differences in what not only he wanted to do, but also what he felt that Congressman Hill wasn't doing. I think one of the more passionate responses came not only when we were talking about reproductive health and abortion with Colonel Jones pointing out that he has a daughter and saying that for him it's a personal issue. But then also when we were talking about gun reforms, as we heard in that earlier segment, that was something that I think both of them really pointed out, that they kind of agree on the fact that there are certain common sense things that need to happen. It's just the specifics of how far they wanted to go with gun reform that they kind of differed on.
All right, George, you were also on the third district. I'm trying to figure out how you got on the third district debate over there. I mean, there's no part of the third district that touches Northeast Arkansas, but I guess it maybe comes close when it spins around up there. Anyhow, you had Congressman Womack, Caitlin Draper, and then Libertarian Bobby Wilson in that race. What was your thoughts? I mean, you were sitting there. What were your thoughts when you were watching the exchanges there?
It was a more cordial debate probably than the first district. They did get into some, there were a few moments where they got into it over some issues, especially abortion. Caitlin Draper told, Congressman Womack that she thought he was a good man, but he makes mistakes when he, votes on things like, abortion. And of course, the Libertarian in the race, Bobby, he kind of like in the first district race, the Libertarian position is that, that basically, like when it comes to issues like FEMA and stuff like that, there's a lot of things that we do that are not constitutional, like foreign aid, stuff like that. They don't think that's in the Constitution and we shouldn't be doing it. So I thought it was a more cordial debate than the first one. I thought, each kind of represented like the canned position of their party. That was kind of my takeaway from that.
Interesting. Fourth district debate, again, another two-person race there. Incumbent Congressman Bruce Westerman, the challenger Reese Howard, an attorney out of Pine Bluff. Again, abortion comes up as another big issue, reproductive rights in that race as well, a common theme through all of the congressional debates. But you've watched that one as well. What was your takeaway on the fourth?
Well, you mentioned abortion, and it was interesting that both of the candidates admitted that their personal views were both pro-life. That even Reese Howard said, I personally am pro-life, but I also believe that it's a women's right to choose. So that was sort of an interesting stance there that they took. Another interesting thing that they talked about was the issue of religion in schools. They talked about how in other states they're implementing the 10 Commandments in the classroom, as well as other different Christian values and ideology. And that was an interesting discussion where Congressman Westerman was saying that, he feels that the country is kind of going away from the Christian founding values of our founding fathers. He does believe in a separation of church and state, but that he feels like we're kind of moving away from that. So that was another interesting point from that debate.
Yeah, interesting argument too making there. I want to hear a little bit from y'all's perspective of what it is like to be a panelist on those. I mean, because you're not asking the questions the whole time, but you got to keep up with what's going on, and just tell people that aren't there, kind of how does it work behind the scenes? Because I've done a lot of debates before too, and it's a really fascinating, kind of interesting experience from the journalist perspective. Whoever wants to go first is fine with me.
What's interesting to me, because you're in a panel, and I know a lot of the journalists who do these panels personally, because I've done panels with them in the past. What's interesting to me is when we come in and we have a set of questions, and it's always interesting to me to see how many questions are similar and which questions are different. And I'll give you an example. In the 3rd District, Steve Bronner brought in a question about NIL, and I just thought it was a great question. Because we know all of the basic questions. They're going to talk about infrastructure and abortion and all these other things, the war in Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah, things like that. So it's always interesting to see what different kinds of questions they'll ask. I think in the 1st District race, we had a question about housing, stuff like that. So that's interesting to me. It's always funny that we sit there for 20 minutes in dead silence waiting for the thing to start. Yeah. And they tell you to turn your phones off. And in the 1st District, I had Brandon Tabor and Diana Davis from KIT with me. And they both turned their phones off 20 minutes ago. And I said, hey guys, you may as well just turn them back on because we're not going to do anything for 20 minutes. So
how about you, Caitrin? What was the experience like?
It was really interesting, and also speaking with the other panelists beforehand about those questions that we were going to ask. It was interesting how many questions were similar. Like you said, I think everybody wanted to ask about immigration, about foreign policy, specifically wars that our allies are engaged in, FEMA, abortion. Those are all topics that we all kind of were like, okay, yes. But those more specific topics that people really wanted to get in, tariffs, taxes, the national debt, those were really interesting to kind of pinpoint where our minds were at, and then also talking about how do we create a well-rounded debate where we're getting all of those topics in. And that took, at least for us, that took the most time beforehand, was trying to sort those questions in order and determine what we wanted to do there. But yeah, not talking for 20 minutes, obviously I've done this before. I've sat on a set before knowing that 1 minute out is sort of a lot of time.
Right, 20 minutes is forever.
Yeah, we were trying to make conversation, but I think people are nervous and they want to do a good job. So yeah, it was more meditative than maybe tense.
Yeah, we got about a minute left here. Just kind of, I think these debates are good for showing those contrasts and getting different positions out there. You certainly hope that people will embrace that and kind of engage in their civic duty to watch those debates and make their choices off of that. Do you feel like that those debates do bring out the contrast, though, that so people can see that there's a delineation between their choices?
Yeah, I think so. I particularly like it when the libertarians are involved, just to be honest with you, because I think it adds flavor to it, because you never know what they're going to say sometimes. I mean, their positions can be all over the place, so I like that. But yes, I honestly think you get a good flavor for what the candidates represent in those debates.
Okay, Caitrin.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job of mentioning that. Like I said, in our debate, Colonel Jones did a great job of saying, here's where we contrast, here's where we differ. So for voters, the whole point of debates is to learn more about the candidates, and I think in all of these, they did a good job of doing that.
And it sounds like from your description of how it kind of works behind the scenes, people can rest assured that the questions are not provided to the candidates in advance when they're just showing up with them, basically, and debating them before you even go on air there and ask them. So Caitrin and George, thank you both very much for being with us today. Appreciate you. Great job on the debates, both of you, and I appreciate you guys making that commitment as well. So
thank you.
All right. We're back with more right after this final word from our sponsors.